All right, so you want to understand how attorney fees work in California? Well, get ready, because it's not as simple as you think. You know that whole, like, winner takes all idea?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not always the case here.
It's definitely more like the Wild West of legal bills.
Ooh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, while most of the country follows what's called the American rule, where each side pays their own lawyer no matter who wins, California throws in a whole bunch of curveballs.
Okay, so let's break down this American rule thing. When would it really, like, hit someone in the wallet?
Okay, imagine you're in like a David versus Goliath situation. You win a lawsuit against this massive corporation, you're feeling amazing, feeling vindicated, but then you get your lawyer's bill and it's still a huge chunk of change. Outright.
Yeah, that's a tough pill to swallow after a victory.
Yeah, that's the American rule in action. Victory doesn't automatically mean a free ride.
So how does California shake things up? How is it different?
Well, California loves exceptions.
Of course they do.
The legislature basically said, in these specific situations, we want you to sue. So we're going to sweeten the deal by guaranteeing that the winner gets their attorney fees covered. It's like a legal bonus round.
Ooh, a bonus round. I like it. All right, so give me some examples. Like, where do these bonus rounds come into play in real life?
One you've probably seen is in contracts.
Contracts. Everyone's favorite.
Right. You know that little attorney fees clause that's always buried in the fine print? Well, California Civil Code 1717 says if that clause exists, it swings both ways.
Both ways. So it's not just protecting one side.
Exactly. Let's say you're renting an apartment and your lease agreement says the landlord can recover legal fees if they have to sue you. Well, guess what? If you sue them for, like, not fixing a leaky roof and you win, you get to collect your attorney fees, too.
Even though the contract only mentioned the landlord.
Yep, even though the contract only mentioned the landlord.
So California's looking out for the little guy, making those contracts a bit fairer.
Yeah, they're all about fairness.
Are there any other situations where the law encourages lawsuits?
Oh, absolutely. Think discrimination in the workplace.
Oh, right. A very important topic.
Yeah. The Fair Employment and Housing Act, or FEHA, makes it less risky financially for victims of discrimination to take on powerful employers. If you win a discrimination case under FEHA, the other side is probably going to have to pay your legal fees.
That makes a lot of sense, leveling the playing field when one party has significantly more resources.
Right. And there's another big one we'll save for later. It's called California Code of Civil Procedure 1021.5, and it deals with situations where you're fighting for the public good, like environmental cases or protecting civil rights.
Ooh. So it's not just about winning for yourself, but for, like, the greater good?
Exactly. We call that the private attorney general concept.
Okay, private attorney general. I like the sound of that. I can't wait to hear more about it later. Okay, so we've covered those laws that encourage certain types of lawsuits, but what about, like, the agreements we sign? You know, the nitty-gritty details of contracts?
Ah, yes, those. So in California, if a contract clearly states who is responsible for attorney fees, courts will generally enforce it.
So reading the fine print is super important. Those tiny little clauses can have big consequences.
You have no idea. Remember that lease agreement example we talked about? Even if a contract seems one-sided, like only the landlord gets their fees covered, California has that reciprocity rule from Civil Code 1717. So both sides have skin in the game.
It's like California is saying, hey, we see those sneaky clauses and we're not letting anyone get away with them.
Pretty much. But there's a catch. Even if your contract allows for fee recovery, courts still have the final say. They'll make sure those fees are reasonable.
Okay, reasonable. We're going to have to unpack that later because I have a feeling it's not as straightforward as it sounds.
Oh, you're absolutely right.
Okay, but before we get to that, what about those, like, classic cases, you know, the slip and falls, the fender benders, the, you know, torts? Who pays in those situations?
Good question. So in most tort cases, like personal injury or negligence, the American rule is king. So each party typically covers their own legal expenses no matter who wins.
Wait, really? So if someone rear-ends me and I win the case, I still have to pay my lawyer?
Unless you have a contract with the other person that says otherwise. Or there's a specific law that applies to that type of tort.
Okay, so special circumstances. So basically with torts, it's every party for themselves unless there's a law or a contract saying otherwise.
That's right. But here's a twist. If the person who caused the harm acted really badly, like with intentional fraud or malice, things can change.
Ooh, things can change. What do you mean?
We'll talk about this more when we discuss punitive damages, but even in those tort cases where everyone usually pays their own way, bad actors might end up paying more than just compensation.
Interesting. So there are consequences for behaving badly, and those consequences might include paying for the victim's lawyer. I like it.
It's all about accountability, right?
Exactly. But speaking of accountability, let's get back to that Code of Civil Procedure 1021.5, the one you mentioned about the private attorney general.
Oh, yeah, the one where people can sue for the greater good. Tell me more about that.
Well, imagine a situation where a company is polluting a river.
Okay. Yeah, I can picture it.
They're harming the environment and maybe even people's health. But maybe nobody has been individually harmed enough to justify a lawsuit. So this is where 121.5 comes in. It lets individuals step up and act as a private attorney general.
So everyday people can become like superheroes for the public good.
Pretty much. But it's not easy. To qualify for attorney fee recovery under this rule, you have to prove you achieved a significant public benefit.
So it can't be just any lawsuit. It has to be something that really makes a difference for a lot of people.
You got it. And there are some great examples. For instance, a group of citizens once sued to protect a coastal area from being developed. They didn't own the land, but they argued that destroying it would hurt the whole community.
And did they win? Did they become like eco-warriors? They did. They successfully enforced an environmental law and were awarded attorney fees under this private attorney general rule. And there are others, similar cases that have protected vulnerable groups, ensured access to public services, and even fought consumer fraud.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. It's great that California law gives people that power to challenge things and potentially make a real difference. But let's be realistic. Even if you are eligible to get your attorney fees covered, those bills can still be scary. Is there any limit on what lawyers can charge?
That's where the idea of reasonableness comes in. California courts want to make sure those fees are fair and in line with the work that was actually done.
Okay, you've said reasonable a few times now. Let's finally dive into what that actually means. What makes an attorney fee reasonable in the eyes of the law?
All right, so the main tool California courts use is called the lodestar method.
The lodestar method.
Yeah, think of it like calculating the cost of a taxi ride. You consider how far you traveled, which is like the number of hours the attorney worked on your case. And then you think about the rate per mile, which is like the attorney's hourly rate.
So it's just basic math. Hours times rate equals fees.
It's a starting point, but it's not just about the numbers. Just like with a taxi ride, certain things can affect the final cost, like surge pricing or tolls.
Okay, so what are the surge pricing and tolls in the legal world?
Well, courts look at things like the complexity of the case. A simple contract dispute might have a lower hourly rate than like a super complicated intellectual property case.
Right, so specialized knowledge means a higher price, like calling a fancy car service instead of a regular taxi.
Exactly. And then there's the attorney's track record. A lawyer who wins a lot of cases might be able to charge more than someone who's fresh out of law school.
Makes sense. Experience and success usually cost more. What else do they consider?
The biggest one is the results they got for the client. Did they negotiate a good settlement? Did they win a big judgment at trial? Those outcomes really impact the final fee.
So if a lawyer wins $1 million lawsuit, they can probably charge more than someone who helped me settle a small argument with my neighbor.
That's the idea. It's all about making sure the fees match the value of the work and the result.
Okay, that seems fair. It's good to know there are some safeguards to prevent lawyers from going overboard with their billing.
The courts are like referees. They make sure everyone's playing by the rules and that the fees are justified.
This is all making a lot more sense now.
Mm-hmm.
I feel much more informed. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, there's one area I'm really curious about: family law. You know, divorces, custody battles, those things can get super messy and expensive. So how does California deal with attorney fees in those situations where emotions are running high?
Family law is definitely a unique area. Things can get very intense. California Family Code Section 2030 gives judges a lot of power to decide who pays attorney fees in these cases. And they often use that power to make things fair, especially when one spouse makes a lot more money than the other.
So if one spouse is a millionaire and the other isn't, the court could make the richer spouse pay for both sides.
It's possible. The judge will consider each person's income, assets, and their ability to pay. They don't want one side to have an unfair advantage just because they have deeper pockets.
That's good to know. Going through a divorce or custody battle is stressful enough without having to worry about being priced out of legal representation.
Absolutely.
We've covered so much today, from specific laws and contract clauses to those fascinating private attorney general cases. I'm starting to feel like a legal expert.
Well, we've only just scratched the surface. There's still a lot more to explore.
Like what?
Well, we need to delve deeper into those punitive damages and uncover some more nuances of fee recovery in different types of cases.
Well, buckle up, listener. There's much more to come in. Part 2 of our deep dive into California attorney fees. Welcome back, listener. It feels like we just scratched the surface of this whole attorney fee thing in California.
We did, and you know what? We didn't even get to punitive damages yet.
Oh yeah, I'm curious about that. Remind me how those work again.
Okay, so punitive damages are sometimes called exemplary damages, and it's not just about making the victim whole, it's about punishing the wrongdoer.
For being extra bad.
Right. It's like a financial slap on the wrist for being really, really bad. And the thing is, in California, those punitive damages can include paying for the victim's lawyer.
Wait, really? So even if the normal rules wouldn't cover my legal fees, I could still get the other side to pay if they were bad enough.
Exactly. It's like the court saying, you messed up so badly, you're going to pay for the harm and you're going to pay for the victim's lawyer.
Ouch. Yeah, that's a pretty big consequence.
It's meant to deter people from acting badly.
I can see that. There's like a financial penalty box for bad behavior.
Yeah, I like that. And it's especially important in those tort cases where the American rule usually applies.
Right, the slip and falls the fender benders where each side usually pays their own way.
Exactly. So even if there's no law or contract saying the loser has to pay attorney fees if their actions were outrageous enough to deserve punitive damages, those damages could include the victim's legal bills.
So it's like a bonus layer of accountability for people who act really badly.
You got it. It makes people think twice before doing something they know is wrong.
Okay, so we've talked about specific laws that say who pays attorney fees. We've talked about contract clauses and now punitive damages. Is there anything else I need to know?
It's important to remember that these rules apply in lots of different legal situations, but how they play out can be different depending on the specifics of the case.
Right, so there are always going to be exceptions in weird situations. It's a good reminder that I probably need an expert to help me figure it all out if I'm ever in a legal situation.
Definitely. Legal issues can be very complicated.
Well, at least now I have a better idea of the factors that can determine who pays for the lawyers in California.
Me too. I think we've covered a lot of ground.
Before we wrap up, can we revisit that whole reasonableness thing? You mentioned it a few times, but I'm still a little fuzzy on how courts actually decide if fees are reasonable.
Oh, yeah, sure. So remember the lodestar method?
Vaguely.
Okay, so it starts with multiplying the attorney's hourly rate by the number of hours they worked on the case.
The basic math.
Right. But then there are adjustments to that initial number.
Adjustments. Like what?
Well, they look at how complex the case was. A simple contract case might have a lower hourly rate than a really complicated intellectual property case.
Okay, so if it's super specialized and complicated, the lawyer can charge more per hour.
And they also consider the lawyer's track record. A lawyer who wins a lot of cases might get a higher rate than someone who's just starting out.
Makes sense. Experience usually costs more. What else?
Probably the most important factor is the results the lawyer got for their client. A huge settlement or a big court victory will usually mean higher fees.
So a lawyer who wins a multi-million-dollar lawsuit can charge way more than someone who helped me settle a small argument with my neighbor.
Pretty much. It's about making sure the fees are in line with the value of the work and the outcome.
I get it. So it's not like lawyers can just charge whatever they want.
No, they can't. The courts have the power to reduce fees if they think they're too high, or if the lawyer didn't get good results.
Okay, so there are safeguards in place.
Definitely.
This has been really helpful. I feel a lot more comfortable about how legal fees work now.
That's great to hear. And remember, this is just an overview.
Yeah, it feels like we just explored the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to learn.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But hopefully this deep dive gives you a good starting point.
It definitely does.
Yeah.
I feel a lot more informed and confident. Speaking of confidence, what's the most important thing for our listeners to remember as they go about their lives, signing contracts, maybe thinking about lawsuits, just navigating this legal world?
Well, the American rule is the starting point in California, but there are a lot of exceptions.
We've covered a lot of them today.
And whether it's through specific laws, contract agreements, or even things like the private attorney general, there are a lot of situations where the winner can get their legal fees paid by the other side.
And even if you didn't start the lawsuit, you could end up paying the other side's lawyer if you do something wrong.
It's important to be aware of all of that. You got to know the rules of the game.
I feel much better equipped to play the game now. I feel like I can at least understand the basics now.
Exactly. You know what to look out for and you know when to get help.
This has been a really enlightening conversation. I feel like I have a much better grasp of how legal fees work in California.
I'm glad to hear that.
And remember, listeners, this is just the beginning. There's always more to learn, and the law is always changing. Well, buckle up, listener. We're about to wrap up our deep dive into California attorney fees. Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive, and wow, we've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
We've explored those hidden clauses in contracts, talked about the private attorney general, and learned how sometimes being bad can cost you more than just money.
It's been a whirlwind.
And it's really made me realize how much we just assume about the legal world.
I think a lot of people don't even realize what they don't know.
Yeah, signing a contract, considering a lawsuit, it can all have huge financial consequences. And it's important to understand how attorney fees work.
Exactly, and that's why we're here to help people understand their rights and make smart decisions.
So before we wrap up, what are some final pieces of advice for our listeners? What should they keep in mind as they navigate this complex legal world?
Well, I think the most important thing to remember is that the legal landscape is constantly changing.
So what we learned today is a good starting point, but things could be different tomorrow.
It's always a good idea to stay updated and seek professional advice when you need it.
So don't rely on what you remember from this episode or what you find on the internet.
All right. It's like trying to fix your car engine yourself when you hear a weird noise.
I would never do that.
Most people wouldn't. They'd take it to a mechanic.
Exactly. Someone who knows what they're doing.
And just like a mechanic can help you with your car, a good lawyer can help you understand your legal options.
So it's not just about knowing the rules, it's about knowing how to use them.
And knowing when to get help.
I feel so much more prepared to deal with legal stuff now that I have a better understanding of these things.
Knowledge is power, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The more you know about the legal system, the better you can protect yourself. This deep dive has been fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and helping us all make sense of this attorney fee puzzle.
It's been my pleasure. And to all our listeners out there, stay curious, stay informed, and don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it.
That's great advice. Thanks again. And until next time, stay safe out there in the legal jungle.